Hi Clive.
Hi, Stephen.
Osterly Associates. Explain a
Yeah,
bit about them.
okay. Well, basically, we are a business support organisation, but exclusively for sport. So we work with sports clubs, community-based sports clubs, larger sports clubs, football clubs, rugby clubs, gym clubs, pretty well all sports. But we also work with professional players as well, particularly those who are thinking about leaving the sport and having to find a new career, or those that unfortunately have had to leave the sport either through injury or simply not being signed again, basically.
Why sports? I mean, surely there's more money to be made, with the commercial sector or any other sector. Why sports?
There's a huge lot more money to be made in what you would call the commercial sector. The people within the Osterly team are fully experienced business advisors, and we have worked and we still do work with companies of all sorts, engineering companies, ordinary, sort of one-man bands and quite large boardrooms. But we found that there is a huge need to work with sports clubs. We started it as an exercise, really to see, around about the time of the Olympics, to see whether or not we could actually be of help to sports clubs. And at the end of the day, a sports club is a business the same as any other business is. Whether it be a one-man band, where a personal trainer who literally just runs one class a week, your parallel would be a self-employed person, or whether it be a fully fledged sports club, golf club, football club that's been going for 100 years or so. They're all businesses. They all have to find an income. They all have expenditure. Some have wages to pay. Some have grounds to pay for and things like that. So they have to be run along business lines. And what we found was that when we started working with sports clubs, although the passion was there to develop the sport, the skills aren't necessarily in place to be able to make it sustainable and run it and keep it as a business needs to be kept. So we found that we were getting called more and more into the basics of running a business, really, but albeit a sports club.
So you say you work with all clubs, irrespective of the size and the sport.
Yeah, there are, well, literally thousands and thousands of sports clubs throughout the United Kingdom, um, of all different sorts. Some are successful, some are less successful. We will work with any sports club. We want to develop sports clubs. We want sports clubs to be sustainable. It's very nice to be able to work with the larger club. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, but we get a huge amount of satisfaction because when we're working with a community-based sports club, it means so much, not just to the people who run the club, but the people who actually take part in the club, the kids' parents. So it's a great joy for us to be able to work with sports clubs of any size, really.
Okay. I understand that you also run a series of workshops around the UK. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, the workshops came about really because we are ultimately a small organisation. There's only a handful of business advisors who are part of the Osterly team. We find that it's far more beneficial if we can to bring groups of clubs together. It needn't be across the same sport. Quite often there's a huge benefit in bringing different sports together. So we run a series of workshops which are based along the lines of key things that you need to do to ensure that your sports club is sustainable. So for instance, we have a standard, a business standard called Raising the Bar, which takes a sports club from the very beginning right through to everything they need to be able to run so long as a business. And that's a series of two workshops, and we have one-to-one interventions with the sports club with that. But we do other more specific ones as well. We look at customer service, where you might think customer service is just for a shop to be involved in. Well, no, it's not, because anybody that engages with the general public need to have some level of customer service there. So we put customer service and quality issues together so that it's the best experience for whoever is participating in that club. We run them on sponsorship. We run them on how to gain grants. A lot of sports clubs need grants and actively look for grants. Well, we just don't show them where the grants are. What we do is we show them how to identify the grants, how to apply for the grants, and very often we will actually sit with them while they're applying for the grants. We help them to think about new income streams, so we have workshops on looking at income streams. And we've got a new piece of work that we're piloting at the moment, which is looking at the actual spectator experience, because we're finding that pretty well across most sports, certainly at community level, getting spectators to actually attend is becoming more and more difficult. And clubs need spectators because obviously they need the income from it, but they also need the joy and the noise that goes with a participating sport. So we're looking at a number of different initiatives to try to see how we can actually improve the experience for the spectator, which ultimately will drive up the numbers, basically.
Excellent. So surely that's the responsibility of the sports governing bodies. Are they not responsible for this? And how do you work with those?
Well, we work quite closely with the governing bodies. The governing bodies are there to provide a standard and a set of rules for sports clubs to adhere to. And part of that, they will have development officers and they'll have volunteer officers and a number of pieces of support that will work to help in their particular sport to prosper. We found that by talking with the national governing bodies, that we share their vision. So we don't do anything that is a hindrance to them. We complement what they do. So we're finding that the national governing bodies are quite supportive of what we're doing. At the end of the day, if we can make a club sustainable financially and from a business point of view, then ultimately they will be able to achieve their core objective, which is improving the standard and the level of sport within from their clubs, basically.
Excellent. I understand that you run a scheme that helps professional players to, in their business and things like that, and to develop the skills. How does that work?
This is something that's evolved out of some of the other programs that we've been running. As I said earlier, a lot of our members of the team are fully experienced business advisors, and a number of us have been involved in what's commonly referred to as the business startup programs. So these are programs that anybody can access to help them if they're thinking about starting a business for the first time. And what we found when we became involved in Osterly was that there was actually a crossover between some of the business startup programs and professional sports people. Mainly because when professional sports people think about the end of their career or come to the end of their career, one of the obvious options for them is to consider whether they should actually start their own business. But we found that there were fairly unique things that ex-professional players were looking for that wasn't and isn't actually available in what I would call a standard business startup program. So one of the things that we are very keen on with working with ex-professional players is to understand their emotional needs as much as their business needs.
Of course, there's been obviously a lot of things in the news regarding players and player welfare and things like that. How can you help them?
It is a very, I wouldn't say we have the answers to everything. It is a very delicate situation, but we held talks with the PFA before we started to do this, and we have experience of working with ex-military people, and it's a very similar sort of situation. If you can imagine a professional sports person, they have trained exclusively for their sport from a very, very early age. So it's effectively controlled their life. So, 13, 14, 15 years old, yes, they've kept up with their academic studies sometimes, but others haven't. They've been signed to a club or they've been signed to a particular sport, they've trained, and the main focus has been how they live the lifestyle and how they sort of train and their physical development and their sporting development. Those who are lucky enough to get to quite a high level are then, they have agents, they have the clubs look after them, and basically everything they do is done for them. And again, similar sort of comparison to the military, where they have a set of rules and they have to adhere to it and everything's provided for them. When it all comes to an end, it's a huge, huge blow to them, because all of a sudden they are out of not just changing career, but they're actually out of the structures that they've been used to in their life. And there's this vacuum that needs to be filled. Sadly, we've seen evidence in the last sort of couple of years with the publicity. I don't know if you ever saw Clark Carlisle's documentary that he did about professional footballers and some of the issues that they face. So we found that that's not just restricted to football. There's other professional sports as well where similar sorts of issues. Cricket, again, there was a tragic incident last year involved with that. So what we try to do within the programme is to actually acknowledge that these emotional concerns are there, and we provide counsellors for them. So that, for instance, if a player came onto our workshop, which is called X-Pro to Boardroom, then we actually give them access to counsellors, so that as they're developing their business idea and developing their business plans and hopefully going up to launch, there is someone that they can talk to, will act as a mentor to them, and it's just there as somebody there in the background that's there for them, basically. And we're finding that this is a hugely valuable contribution to the startup programme.
So you call it X-Pro to Boardroom, you say?
X-Pro to Boardroom. It's always difficult with names. We didn't want to be too gimmicky, but basically, the people that we are targeting for these workshops are ex-professional sports people, irrespective of the sport, but the most well-known are obviously footballers, but rugby players and cricket players and golfers and tennis players, anybody that has been a professional sports person, basically. Boardroom, sorry, all I was going to say was Boardroom is obviously an aspiration, but we're trying to sort of demonstrate that we're not just talking about becoming a window cleaner or owning a pub or a newsagents or something like that. There's a lot more.
Yeah, so why X-Pro? I mean, let's face it, there's hundreds of business support organisations out there that help people start up businesses, and
there are.
Why X-Pro?
There are, and we're involved with them, and we work ourselves. We feed into business startup programs all over the country. This is specific for sport. For the reasons I outlined before, we have an empathy with the sports person. The backup that we have in terms of the psychological counselling that's available to them. We mentor the players. So it's almost a step down process from a huge, highly structured environment where everything is done for you. And we step them down slowly to the stage where these people have to make their own decisions and have to find their own way in life. And the business, running a business, and it's not necessarily just starting a business up from scratch. We will look at and we will be helping people who maybe want to buy into a franchise, so there is an existing business structure for them, or sometimes want to actually buy an existing business and take over the business. Again, if you sort of use the example of the footballer, they sometimes have certainly more money than we're used to. I'm not necessarily talking about the sort of people on £300,000 a week. They probably wouldn't need to use us and wouldn't want to use us. But there are players out there in some of the higher leagues that have been earning considerable sums of money in comparison to the normal person who would be thinking about starting a business. But all of a sudden that stops as well. So it's not just the emotional side of the adoration and the structure that they've had, but also sudden loss of income as well. So we want to make sure that we have the empathy with that. So where we differ from your typical business startup program is that it's very much about the individual. It's not about trying to get people into business. And I quite often say this, and people look at me rather shocked when I say it, but sometimes going into business is not actually the right thing to do. And if we can identify that soon enough, then we can actually work with that player and give them alternatives.
Stop them making
mistakes. Stop them making huge mistakes. And it's very sad to see. Going back to a few years ago, before it was acknowledged that professional sports people had these significant needs, I can actually name 4 or 5 quite well-known footballers who retired from the game. They didn't have the huge amounts of money that the Premiership guys have or something like that, but nevertheless, in comparison to other people living in the same street as them, they were quite wealthy. And they would buy a pub, they'd buy a newsagents and things like that. They'd gone bust within a couple of years because they didn't have the business skill to do it. It wasn't really what they wanted to do. So they didn't have the passion for it that they had for the sport. So they lost money, and some of them quite sadly lost considerable amounts of money. So we want to make sure, and we understand that, and we want to make sure that wherever possible we prevent that from happening.
So, like, getting back to, say, like the Carlisle documentary and things like that, so are you trying to say that your programme will tackle these issues that we see in the papers and things, or...?
I wouldn't like to say that we'll tackle them. We acknowledge them, and we tailor our programme to take effect of them, basically. No, it's a very complicated issue surrounding depression within the game. We understand, we hope we understand some of the pressures that professional players have, the intensity of the lives that they lead right up into the time that they leave the sport. So we make allowances for that, and we have the backup with the counsellors. We are not an answer to it. I don't think anybody really knows what the answer is. All we are is one small support mechanism for them, that if it's right for them to have their own business, then we're not just casting them adrift and saying, right, okay, go set up the business and we'll come in and tell you whether you're doing it right or not. It's not. We hold their hands, sort of metaphorically, from the day that they decide whether they want to think about having a business. We'll talk with them, help them to formulate their ideas, hopefully encourage them to drop some of the more crazy ideas, but we'll help them sort of develop that into a business plan. We'll help them develop the business strategies. We'll help them actually start the business and launch the business. But it doesn't end there, because we will stay with that player for as long as that player wants. So even if that player has successfully launched the business and 3 years later still needs our help, we're here for him or her. It is as closely tailored to the individual package that we can feasibly do, basically.
So why should a footballer go on such a programme, or any sportsman, as you say? Because, obviously you're saying they're quite used to a lot of money and things. Surely their agent will get them started in business. And, they've probably got loads of advisors and lawyers looking after all that. Surely they're made, aren't they? Again,
it's a bit of a stereotype. Yes, there are a relative few footballers in particular, but also rugby players. They're earning decent money these days, and cricketers. There are a few at the very top level that, yes, they are surrounded by advisors. The football agent is there to look after their footballing career. When their football career ends, then their relationship with the agent, in the majority of times, ends as well. Sometimes, if it's a high-profile footballer and they have been earning the £200,000-300,000 a week, then there might be an additional role for the agent once they've actually left the game. But majority of them, no, they don't. So they don't have huge advisors. There's been quite a bit of publicity in the papers over the last couple of months or so about people being attracted to work with high-profile players who are not necessarily the best advisors for them. So there's a whole mix. You can't generalise on something like this. Some get good support and will never need us, but the vast majority do. And we're not just talking about the Premiership footballers. We're talking about people who play for a local football side, maybe semi-professional as well, in rugby and in cricket and in tennis and in golf and quite a lot of other sports where they get paid for participating in the sport. The money is nowhere near the sort of couple £100,000 type of scenario. If they have an agent, then, as I say, that relationship kind of ends when their playing career ends. And again, that's a big impact for them, because they are with an agent for a number of years, and that agent becomes their mentor as well. And when that stops, again, it's another reason for people like ourselves to pick up and continue to support them, basically.
Mm-hmm. So why should an ex-player think about setting up a business?
not every player, and I would sincerely hope that not every player would automatically think, right, I'm going to set up a business now. I'm going to retire from the game and I'm going to set up my business. But if you look at the attributes of a professional sports player, they actually are very, very suitable for the business world. You think about, I mean, again, going back to stereotypes, people tend to think that if you are dedicated and you're a professional sports person, you're not necessarily the most academically gifted person in the world, to be kind about it. You look at some of the satirical programs, how they pan certain footballers and things like that, and it's so unfair. With the discussions that we had with the PFA have an education program, and other sports do as well through their player unions. They've got an educational program where players, while they're actually playing, can actually get qualifications if they haven't got them before they actually joined. A lot of players went to university before they actually made it as a professional player. There are doctors who have been professional footballers. There are quite a few people in the professions who have had a professional sports background. And there are players who necessarily don't have the academic qualifications, but if it comes down to business acumen and intelligence, then they are really in a good position. If you just think about how a professional player conducts their life from a very early age, they are focused. They're focused on their sport. They have a passion, albeit for their sport. They have to have an ability to be able to read the game and to foresee what's around in the future. They have the ability to make very quick decisions. Quite often the decision that they make, they are on their own to make that decision, so they have to be very decisive. They have an ability to foresee what could be happening in a professional game, obviously a few seconds ahead. But if you transfer those core skills to what makes a good business person, they're very similar. You need to be focused. You need to have a passion for your business. You need to be able to foresee what's around the corner. You need to be able to make snap decisions, and you need to be bold enough to make decisions on your own. And these are all key things that if you look at successful entrepreneurs, these are the attributes that they have.
So if a player is in mid-season, it's not going to really be helpful to start a business while while the season's going on. Surely he's going to have his mind elsewhere.
No, I would say no. I would say again. You know yourself. You've set up businesses. When you come to set up a business, you don't just suddenly wake up one morning and say, right, I'm going to set up a business. Mm-hmm. It takes time. You have to plan. You have to do research. You have to make sure. You have to test it out. Professional players, because of the way they lead their lives, they do have downtimes. And again, if you look at the stereotype, it's the typical huge lounge area with plate glass windows and they're on their iBox and they're flicking away. It's not the reality of the situation. So it's an ideal time. This is when they get involved in educational programs. This is when they start doing community work and charity work and things like that. So all we're saying is that if a player has made a decision that they want to seriously consider setting up a business, then they can use that time. We work around them in terms of our interaction with them. We would never suggest or try and persuade that they would do anything outside the needs of their profession, because at the end of the day, we would like them to stay in their sport for as long as they possibly can, because it's a short life, and the amount of dedication and focus that they put into that sport, they deserve to be there for as long as they possibly can. But no, it's a good time. What tends to happen at the end of the season or in between seasons is that's their rest time. They don't get much rest time, so that's not really a good time for us, because they need to be lying on the beach. They need to be able to see their family and spend some quality time with the family and things like that. So mid-season is a good time for us, I would say, for that.
Excellent. So yeah, I'm sure that's going to be really welcomed by professionals all around. So have you got any Expo to Boardroom programs? Any in the future?
Yep. It's a continuous program.
So how do the footballers join? So if someone's watching this now and wants to join,
to actually join the program, it's fairly straightforward. As I say, we are in contact with the PFA, and the PFA would give you our contact details. But we have a website which is www.osterly-associates.co.uk. People can contact me on contact.osterlyassociates@yahoo.co.uk. If you do that, then I'll literally get in touch pretty well straight away. I'll arrange to have a chat with you, and then we can see how it goes from there. To actually participate in the Ex-Pro to Boardroom programme, it's a continuous programme. You can join it at any stage. We run the workshops as and when they are needed, basically, and we run those throughout the UK. So if we've got, sort of 10 or 12 players in the northwest of England, then we'll put one on to suit them in the northwest of England. The workshops are very much about the building of the business plan and the basics, the rules and regs, the bookkeeping, and all the things that ordinarily you would get on a business startup program, basically. The work that we do, the real program, is all about working with the player on a one-to-one basis, understanding their needs and helping them both emotionally but also from a business point of view to actually get that business started. It's as much about mentoring as it is about coaching, basically.
Excellent. Thanks again, Clive. So just to recap, your Ex-Pro to Boardroom is open to any sports professionals, from any player, from any sport. And if you want any details, is that right? You can just go onto your website.
Yeah, go onto the website, or please contact me. The email address that I gave out comes to me 24/7, and I respond pretty well quickly. And I love to have a chat with you. More than happy.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, Clive, and
Thank you,
good
Stephen.
luck. Cheers.
Thank you.